talk about the brainstem again today because the brainstem is so important. We need to talk about the brainstem a few times. So let's check all the technology. Everybody can hear me. Everybody can see me if they're live, and I will say hello to those people who are live on the show. Okay. So going back to what we talked about last time, going back to the brainstem, we're just going to go through the parts of the brainstem, and I always want to remind everybody that the division medulla, pons, mesencephalon, and cerebellum is just an anatomical, not a functional distinction. So when we talk about the brainstem, we talk about the medulla, we talk about it as a functional entity. That's not what the medulla is. There is parts in the brainstem that go through the pons, through the medulla. So when we talk about these, the medulla does this and the pons does that. In a way that's correct, and in another way that's absolutely incorrect. So that's what I always want to remind you of. Somebody went there, looked at the brain, did a median cut, a sagittal cut, and had these small part, the medulla, and the fat part in the pons, and the small part again, the mesencephalon, and then the very fat part in the back, the cerebellum. We had 4 parts. There we go. We have 4 parts to distinguish in the brainstem. So what I want to talk about is 3 things actually, and I want to mention 3 things because we don't have the time to talk in any detail. That's why our seminars are a few days long, not just half an hour long. But in a half an hour, we can talk about a few issues that we want to consider in our thinking process, and that's what I always think is the first thing we need to change when we want to change the way we look at a patient. We need to change our thinking pattern. So if I look at somebody walking and I'm thinking biomechanics, I might say, the knee joint is not going into internal rotation, things like that. If I look at it from a biochemical aspect, I might think, maybe he does not have enough vitamin B on board, so he's not having good metabolism, things like that. That's why he's not walking correctly. If I look at it from a neurological perspective, I do think about muscle tension, muscle activity. I'm not so much looking at the joint because the joint itself is a passive structure. So I'm looking more at the musculature. I'm looking at the tendons, the ligaments, the proprioception, the skin. I'm looking at the interplay between different joints, the foot, the ankle, and the knee, and the hip, and the pelvis, and the back, and of course going all the way up. And then from up here, I'm looking at the vestibular system because that's influencing the way I'm standing, that's influencing the way I'm walking. And I might also look at the visual system because in the visual system there might be a problem processing visual information. Then this default or this fault in processing the visual information might lead to bad biomechanics because if I can't process how far something is away, I might not move adequately. So all these things are influencing the motion, of course. And while I was mentioning that, all of these things have something to do with the brainstem because proprioception in the leg or in the knee can go back to the brainstem through the dorsal tracts going into the nuclei in the medulla. So we have a lot of proprioception going on in the medulla. The largest information going through the dorsal part, the spinal cord ending in the medulla and then going on to the brain, upwards to the brain, to the thalamus, etc., but also to the cerebellum. So the cerebellum being our biggest proprioceptive ganglion. And that's also brainstem. So there we're talking about brainstem. We're talking about brainstem when we talk about locomotion, because that's what the mesencephalon does. The mesencephalon initiates or stops or modifies locomotion. The mesencephalon integrates visual, auditory information to our movements. So when it's orienting reactions that are guided through the mesencephalon, you might say, the tectum, which processes visual and auditory information, which then causes alignment. That's what it's called in neurology. I might have my visual map here, my head map here towards the camera, my body map towards the camera, and there might be a sound that might be interesting in this direction. So I move my eyes, I move my head, and I align my system, my eye map, my head map, and my body map towards that, and I might walk towards it if I think it could be interesting for me. So that's what the mesencephalon is doing. It's a lot of motion, a lot of interaction. That's why it's also called the integrator between the body and the external environment. But that's, of course, not the only place where external environment is processed, but it's putting those things together because I want to interact with the environment. You know, it's not that I just want to process it, I want to interact with it. And if I'm only interacting with it with my eyes because I'm scanning it, I'm looking at a picture, that's also an interaction because I'm moving something, and maybe I'm just moving my eyes with saccades and or smooth pursuits or whatever I'm using. When I'm looking at a picture, usually it's saccades to scan the picture. So saccades, the tectum, the upper colliculi, the superior colliculi, saccades, but also gaze stabilization. So I'm looking at the camera and I'm moving and my eyes are stabilizing. That's also what the mesencephalon does. So now I'm fixing my eyes, I'm focusing my eyes on one spot, and I'm still able to move all the other body parts according to what I want to do with it. So mesencephalon, a lot of integration from upper systems, motion systems, but also external exteroceptive systems, and body systems, mainly locomotion, mainly body movement, and eye movement and head movement. So all these things are here. So we have somebody joining us, so I say hello, thanks for joining us. We're talking about the brainstem again today. So if you want to, no, I can't say that. We're just preparing that, but I might already say that we have our first seminar, our basic seminar in German available for free at the moment. And we're preparing that to have that available also in English because we have all the videos and the manuals all already finished in English, and we're going to have it available on our website, and I'm going to be telling you when that will be available. You can just look at it for free. So videos, a whole bunch of videos and a whole bunch of pages, pictures, and how to treat, and we're going to show some of that, of course, today. So let's go back to what patients I had today. So this morning somebody came in and he has some sort of neurological problem. You might say it's a Parkinson's, but actually it's not, because he does not have a dopamine or a lack of dopamine, but he has a lack of dopamine receptors in his basal ganglia. They measured that. So right basal ganglia, lack of dopamine receptors, therefore bad motor output to the left part of the body, which means that movements like these or shoulder movements coordinated, also leg movements are kind of hard, but nevertheless, although we know there's a structural problem, we can change the information issue of it. So he might also have information problem, vestibular system, visual system, and if all the other systems are working well, that structural problem in his basal ganglia might not be so bad. So we're working on it, and he's getting better. And what we need to do at some point, this measurement of the receptor sites in the basal ganglia, that has been, I think that was like 2 years ago. So at some point we have to check if maybe even there is more receptors now in his basal ganglia, because we also provided him with anti-inflammatory substances, because we might assume that it's autoimmune issue. So of course that goes through the brainstem. So if he wants to walk and his gait pattern is kind of awkward, no way we can get around the brainstem. We can get around the cerebellum. So of course with him always working on the brainstem function and on the integration of the brainstem, and the integration process is what I'm going to show today. That's what we're going to do, some practical stuff. So what else did I have? I had first thing in the morning, I have to think, I can't even remember it, so I treated the patient, finished. So we had some pain in the neck this morning, probably due to an accident to the hand. It was a fracture, and then it didn't heal. Then they operated it. They did a denervation, so they took the nerve away. They killed the nerve, so there's no more pain, but there's still pain. That's always a problem. They think they can just cut the nerve off, and then the pain is gone, not maybe realizing that the pain is actually in the head, in the brain, due to a signal, but you can't take the signal away if you just kill the nerve, okay? So that's something I've seen a lot of times. Of course, I don't see the patients where it works, because then they're good, but I see the patient where it doesn't work, and I don't know. My impression is it doesn't work with anybody, but of course that is biased because I don't see patients that it worked with. But so that was one thing. And of course, we looked at the brainstem because all of that input, first of all, especially the proprioceptive input, goes into the brainstem. Also, interoceptive input, and he had a lot of interoceptive or visceral motor. No, you can't say that. Interoceptive problems. So temperature was okay, but very slight touching of the skin caused sensory motor defaults. What also caused defaults was pinpricks or what do you call it? My English today. I took a toothpick. That's what I did. I took a toothpick, and that's what I do with my patients when I want to see if can't think of it. The pointy things, when you have a pointy thing, you go to the skin. So if that caused any problem, yes, it did. Also, just air to his hair. So hair is both proprioceptive, has proprioceptive innervation, but also has interoceptive innervation. So that was a problem. So air, light touch, pinpricks, and also different joint positions. That's more proprioceptive issue. All of these things are processed in the brainstem. So whenever we did that, when we did functional testing on his hand, on his skin, on his muscle, on his tendons, on his ligaments, on his bone, very important. I always do bone testing. So bone is surrounded by a skin, Knochenhaut, we say in Germany. So that's the bone skin. I don't know, periosteum, you would say. So that's densely innervated. So we test the skin, we test the muscle, we test the tendons, we test the bones, we test joint capsules, we test positions, we test motor function. None of that would work without the brainstem. So all of that was including the brainstem. And of course, what we're going to show today is not a functional testing, but more like a passive, I always say, testing the cable. And so we did all the functional testing, and all of that is brainstem, medulla, proprioception, also maybe some interoception, but interoception is more pons, the parabrachial nucleus. So brainstem. So that was brainstem. So I think there's no patient, and I might want to say none of my patients I treat. None at all. I can go without treating the brainstem or looking at the brainstem. It just doesn't work. It's just so important. Everything comes together. But of course, it's not everything. So there's the cortex, there's the midbrain areas. We're going to be talking about these. And of course, there's the spinal cord. We already talked about that. And probably also a little bit going back to that, because we already did some spinal cord testing, and we're going to go back to that because it's just so important. So proprioceptive, somatomotor systems, autonomic systems. What else do we have? The activation systems. So, and that's one thing everybody seems to forget about, that we do not only have tracts that convey motor signals or sensory signals, whether it be somatomotor or visceral motor signals. Parallel to that, we have all these serotonin pathways, noradrenaline pathways, glutamine pathways, histamine pathways, orexin pathways going in parallel, but ending in the medulla, in the spinal cord, it's ending in the spinal cord. So there's one cable maybe going from the brainstem to the spinal cord for motor signal, and there's a whole bunch of other, and I do not have a picture today, but I will bring a picture next time, because I got an illustration made of that, so you can see how much is going on to modulate the function, the sensory and motor function. So that's I always say it's regulating the amplitude, or it's regulating the loudness of a signal, sensory or motor signal. So I can move my arm in a certain way, and I can move it more intensely, but more intensity is not just more action potential going through that nerve from my cortex to the muscle. It's also more activation, so more power going from the brainstem to the spinal cord in that area, or also activating the brainstem. And what that does while it activates, it also causes more blood flow, because that's what we need. If you have more activation of a brain area, you need more blood flow. So we always come back to these two things, information flow. We always come back to these to the other thing, blood flow, providing the system with nutrients, with oxygen, with glucose, with fats, whatever you need to work. And so this is, these are always the things we have to think about. And of course, in the end, what we also need to think about is what's inside the blood. So if I can cause better blood flow regulation to an area, I might be able to enhance the function. It will not get better if I have a bad information flow though. So I need to consider both. So if the body is biochemically healthy, should not be a problem. So I fix the information system, should work. If I fix the information system but the biochemistry is bad because through age or through toxins or whatever it is, it's not going to get you where you might want to go. So that needs to be considered, but also, first of all, we can do autonomic regulation within the body, and of course this third system of the amplitude, how loud does the system work. So here's this patient, she's kind of complaining about how certain sounds irritate her. So yes, it might be the system going from the ear through the vestibulocochlear nerve to the brainstem, going into the medulla, going into the pons, but it might also be the activating system. And we even have something that's the efferent sensory system. So there is, in the brainstem, in the medulla, there's neurons going into the ear, going into the cochlea. So excuse me if I said that wrong in English. So it's regulating the sensitivity of the nerves where the waves, the sound waves are being transmitted to. So it's not just this picking up a signal, but the brain can regulate how loud the signal is going to be already entering the brain. So the sensitivity of the sensor, of the receptor, can be altered. So we have all these efferent sensory systems also in the eye, in the ear, and probably in the whole body. Part of that, of course, the activating system. And I already said last time, the ascending reticular activating system, it's not only ascending, it's also descending. It's not only activating, it's also inhibiting. We have GABA, for example. And it's not only coming from the reticular system, it's also coming from the prefrontal cortex, from the thalamus, from the cerebellum, from the hypothalamus. All these areas, from the septum, all these areas are also contributing to activation of the system. Okay, so let's get into some action. So I'm going to ask my son, Maxi, to come here, because I just want to talk and show about some practical stuff. A whole bunch of things we can talk about in terms of what does the medulla do, what does the cerebellum do. Like the patient I saw last today, he has a problem with regulating his blood pressure. Of course, he's a little bit older, but that should not be the only reason we say, well, you're old, so that's just going to happen like that. No, it could be a regulatory problem. So we looked at, of course, what the brainstem, because that's where the regulation of blood flow is. The vasomotor systems are there. The oscillators for the heart are there in the pons, etc. So of course we had to look at the brainstem. Of course we had to also look at nerves, the vestibular, the vagus nerve, of course, and the glossopharyngeal nerve. Very, very, very important. Very neglected. The vagus. I hear that all the time. You got to train your vagus. You got to do this. You got to stimulate your vagus. You got to breathe to stimulate your vagus. You got to do this thing to work on your vagus nerve. Yes, the vagus is important. Yes, the vagus regulates blood sugar supply for the brain, so it's important to the brain. It does a whole bunch of stuff. But, for example, it regulates more the biochemistry to the body also. And the nerve regulating the biochemistry to the brain is the glossopharyngeal nerve, because it sits right here in the carotid artery. So we have to look at that. Of course, blood pressure regulation to the brain. Do I have enough pressure up here so the nutrients go into the brain? If that doesn't happen, the body's going to upregulate, but maybe it might be a mistake, a measurement mistake in the carotid artery. So, of course, we have to look at that. And I had a whole bunch of patients already who could lower their medication, sometimes get rid of their medication, because we looked at all the parts of the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system influencing blood pressure control. Okay, so part of my day. My son is here, and he's not in pain. He's all good. And I'm just going to show you what we do in neurofunctional integration. Very simple technique, a very simple technique to test and integrate. And yes, we're working with muscle function. And yes, muscle function testing can be problematic, but it can be very helpful because you can locate problems you can't see, because you cannot see information flow. You might see function, which you could interpret as a problem in information flow, yes, but testing information flow is sometimes also very revealing to what problems there are. So simplifying is one of the aspects we need to do when we work with the brain, when we work with the nervous system. So, and of course, it is a simplification, and simplifications always can always have mistakes or cause mistakes, can show you something, not show you something that's not there, not show you something that's there, because maybe the points or the testing we're using is not picking up everything, and that's going to be with every test. There is no test where we can say, okay, we can do this test and we're going to know everything about the medulla or the pons or whatever. That just doesn't exist. Okay, so we can do functional testing, but of course there's a lot of functions, so you'll be going through a lot of functional testing. Or we can just take brain areas, or take the brain or the central nervous system, kind of divide it up into segments in the spine, but also segments in the brain, and then just go through them, because they kind of have to communicate with each other. So that's what this is all about. So very simple, but still very effective. That's what we also teach in our first seminar. So we use this contact right underneath the jaw here. We have the hypoglossal nerve and the glossopharyngeal nerve going in this area, maybe also some vagus nerve. So that's what we use for medulla. So that's our contact for medulla. So we're kind of looking, or we looked for, or also my teacher looked for contacts that represent certain brain areas. And yes, no way that this one contact is going to represent everything this area does, but it's kind of astonishing if you start testing more into function, how much it probably does really represent. But then again, it doesn't represent everything. So, sorry, leave this down. Okay, so here, medulla. So next part, a little awkward, but still, for some reason, works. This part of the head, and I'm going to take the skull, show that again. So this back part here is lambda. So that's where the lambdoid suture comes together. And this is the external posterior protuberantia, posterior externalis. So that's not how it's called, but you know this part, this bony part right here. So between those 2 points, if you put your hand right there, for some reason, and the only anatomical association we have, that it's about, if you would look into the brain here, it's about in the same height as the pons. So that's about the only thing we have. It's quite far away from the pons. For some reason, if you touch this part of the head, it correlates a lot with breathing, especially with inhalation. So that's part of the pons function. It also correlates with kind of with vestibular function, also correlates kind of with jaw function, all things that correlate with the pons. So facial, breathing, jaw, all these things. So this is what we use for pons correlation. It's a representation on the body surface for pons function. All pons functions? Probably not, but it works quite well. So kind of how this evolved is that, well, we have these different brain areas, and we just try to represent them and try to represent. So we always find a spot that we can hold, or that we can touch, or that we can interact with to represent parts of the nervous tissue function. So that's how it is. Okay, so it's like a keyboard, and we're not going into the processor, but we're kind of typing something in the keyboard. So this is letter pons. Okay, and we have here letter medulla. And if you go down here, we can go to the cerebellum. Of course, the cerebellum is right here. That's where the lower part of the brain sits, or the cerebellum sits under the tentorium. So mid part and the more lateral or intermediate parts, what we do not have represented through a contact really is the hemispheres, because that's external, that's environment, that's peri-personal or extrapersonal space. So this represents more central parts, spine, or also visceral systems, so the central parts. Okay, the more lateral parts are more the intermediate part of the cerebellum, represents more motor function of the extremities, more the distal extremities. So we have distal extremity function like moving your hand, things like that. Also some balance issue, but balance issue again more central parts. Coordination more these things here correlate a lot with lateral parts. So lateral part, central part, and lateral part of the occiput, of the lower occiput. These contexts correlate with cerebellar functions. And of course, if I go to the middle part, how do I know it's more visceral, or how do I know it's more spinal? Well, what it interacts with. So if I'm here with the muscles of the spine, it's probably more somatomotor or proprioceptive. So we have both ways. There's signals going from the spinal cerebellum directly into the spinal cord, but also, of course, upwards. So we always think of it as more sensory, but it's also motor. So that's like that. And if we use this and we go more to like the stomach or the intestines, of course we have to go through muscle first, but this would be more the autonomic parts of the cerebellum. So that's what we can test. Okay, so and we have a contact for mesencephalon. So we use the spinous process, the transverse process, the transverse process of C1. If you go on that, there's a whole bunch of receptors on that, regulating head position. And so that's one of the vital or very important things of the mesencephalon, to coordinate head-eye movements, but also coordinate some other stuff, of course, arm movements, etc. So this part correlates with this type of eye movements, head movements, orientation movements, but also some limb movements, especially the nucleus ruber, the ruber nucleus, the red nucleus, arm movement, or arm-leg coordination. So also has to do with gait patterning, also has to do with eyes. For example, this contact correlates with dysfunction of the reflex, light reflex of the eye. So these are all things that correlate with that. And that's when we test this part of the brain, for example, with the eye, then we could replace, and that's what I always said, and that's what we do very often. We try to replace, I say, a cable through a function. Okay, so if I'm testing like the eye and the mesencephalon, and this shows up as causing some problem, of course we test that through muscle function, then I might go ahead and say, well, let's test the eye function that correlates with mesencephalon. Could be an eye movement, like a saccade, or a visual stabilization, but it could also be like the reflex, the pupil reflex, eye reflex. I just forget how that's called, how you call that. Sometimes I forget names, sometimes I forget anatomy names. I don't really care much about it, even in seminars. I just say, well, I think it's called like that, but it's more important to know how to use it in your everyday practice to help a patient than be able to spell out all these nuclei and all that thing. So if you forgive me, I forgive you for not being that exact all the time. Okay, so these are the four contacts: medulla, mesencephalon, and in the back we have the pons contact above the cerebellum contact. That's down here and out here. So what we're just going to do, it's 9 o'clock, and we will do some testing. So now, if you want to test the way we test in the most simple fashion of testing, just see what contact does. So here's a muscle. I want to see if the muscle facilitates, and I want to see if the muscle inhibits. Muscle inhibition is greatly underrated. Yeah, so muscle inhibition works here. Hold very strong, facilitation works here. Okay, so a lot of people just test for strength. Yes, you need to test for strength, but you also need to test for inhibition, because I see a lot of patients who have problems because the muscle will not inhibit, maybe even more so than because the muscle is not activated. So if somebody comes in with a hip pain or with shoulder pain or whatever, and I test all the muscles, and I might not find one single muscle that's not facilitating, I might find 5 muscles that do not inhibit. So I think inhibition a lot more problems than facilitation. So muscle testing is not just, it's strong or it's not strong. Muscle testing, okay, it's strong, and if I go on the muscle spindle, yeah, it should slow down, it should inhibit. Okay, so that's working. Next thing would be integrated muscle function. How does the muscle react to body movements? Okay, so we're going to do that at some other point of time. So I need a muscle so I can have a feedback, because I cannot see information flow between his medulla and spinal cord. Okay, then I touch this part, and I want to know if that causes anything with this muscle function. Okay, so just touch it, touch the muscle, nothing is happening. Then I might go to the spinal cord, go down the spinal cord all the way from the occiput down to the sacrum and test that. Just go over it. I'm causing some proprioceptive, maybe also some interoceptive activation. Nothing is happening. Now I combine it. Now I use this part and this part in the back at the same time. So I'm right here, I'm here, and I say I'm activating the medulla and I'm activating the spinal cord. Okay, so that would look like this. So we already did that just before, because we already taught this just before in German. So we had something, we integrated, no problem right now. So now I might go up. What's the next thing? Would be the pons. Okay, so I touch the back, and I can just touch it like this, go down the spinal cord. I could see if something is happening here. So there's nothing happening right here. Mesencephalon. So I just take the transverse process of C1. Okay, I just forgot to do that right here. Single contact, left and right, nothing is happening. I go on here, I go down his spine, activate all the segments, and yes, there is something going on somewhere in his spine in accordance to C1, you might say. So, or if you want to translate that into a brain area, we would say maybe mesencephalon. Okay, so this and the neck cervical spine, no. This and the upper thoracic spine, no. This and the lower thoracic spine, yes. Okay, so lower thoracic spine, interesting. That's where he just had something with this grip, where we say, oh, medulla, thoracic spine, lower thoracic spine. Now it's mesencephalon. So medulla, lower thoracic spine could be something autonomic, could be something sensory motor, could be something proprioceptive, could be activation system. Serotonin is an activation system sitting in the medulla. So there is not really, I have to think right now really hard. Is there a system going from the mesencephalon down to the spinal cord? Right now, I don't think so, but there is, of course, some motor functions, like from the ruber, nucleus ruber. Of course, the red nucleus is more of this, some people think, but actually what the red nucleus does is integrate this. So this is not very important for us as bipeds, because we're standing on our feet, and we do not have to integrate forelimb and back limb coordination. So that's why our red nucleus looks different than the red nucleus in a cat or a dog, because they do have to coordinate front and back limbs. Okay, so but what this could mean if we put him into like a gait patterning. So we said mesencephalon gait patterning, and sometimes you need to exaggerate that a little bit. So we're not just going to go like this, where we might just walk. We might go like this, really go into into a gate pattern. I'm just going to let him do that. So now I'm switching from a tract, from a nervous system between the lower part of the back and this, and I'm just going to let him do this. And I want some rotation, of course, in the trunk, so I'm just going to let you do that, okay? So you're just going to go like this, okay? Now also use your arms, move your arms, yeah? So just walk, but walk a little bit. See, so what he's doing right now, he's not coordinating himself, okay? And that might be the problem, all right? So he's like saying, well, how do I move my arm and my leg? When I do that consciously, he knows exactly how to run, okay? So he plays soccer. So when I see him run, that works just fine. Now I'm telling him consciously, very often a problem, no problem here. But what could be interesting, if we integrate that, maybe he's going to be able to put that together, okay? So we're going to just try that, okay? Yes, it's not very easy consciously in front of a camera. Agi, you got to walk, okay? So this should be what should come out of it. We'll see if we can fix that just by integrating that, okay? So this is just one idea of what we're looking for right now, a coordination or a communication between the upper part of the brainstem and the lower part of the spinal cord, which is probably something regulating rotation, upright position, limb movements, and all that kind of stuff. So we'll see, okay? That's also very important. Expect something to come out of it. Yes, you should always. I'm going to say hello. Thank you for watching. Expect something to come out of it. Yes and no, you should. Yes, it should change something, but maybe it's not changing what we're just looking for. Maybe this has some other implications. Why? Because what else do we have sitting in the mesencephalon? We have some visceral motor systems, or you could also say emotional motor systems. That's what it's categorized into. The periaqueductal gray. So PAG sitting there, regulating diaphragm movement, regulating pelvic movement, also regulating internal things like taking a pee or going to the toilet, so things like that. Reproduction, so pelvis, the diaphragm, pelvic diaphragm, reproduction. Breathing, also something like fight response, so these are regulated there. So it's visceral activity, breathing and all these things, but it's also motor activity. So that's why it's called the emotional motor system. That's what the official category, but it also has some visceral aspects. So maybe it's that. We're down here, so maybe it has to do something with his breathing also. Okay, so we have to consider that also. That's the part in the mesencephalon that's also associated with breathing, besides the pons being associated with breathing, besides the medulla being associated with breathing. So why don't we test breathing? Okay, so why don't we test breathing with them? So here I can kind of switch into something we call motion patterns, okay? So let's try that, all right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask him to put his arm inside like this and hold it very tight right here, okay? Push toward your hip, okay? Just put your head up, push toward your hip. Okay, so no problem activating his latissimus dorsi. No. Okay, so no problem right here. So, a function of the lat, and it kind of is not what you see in studies when they study the lat according to breathing, because usually the lat is activated in breathing in the EMG. But what I see functionally, and that makes total sense, that it doesn't like tighten down when you try to breathe in. That would be awkward if you're kind of tightening down your lat, causing your ribs not to come out and breathe. It should give space. So maybe the activation is active enlargement of the space. So elongation, active elongation of the muscle. And that's what this might look like. So most people think that activation of a muscle is just shortening, contraction. I don't think so. I actually think there is active elongation of a muscle. I haven't found a lot on that, but I'm very sure that this exists. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let him breathe in while he's holding here, okay? So I'm going to just go like this. I'm going to stand behind him, okay? So I hope you can see that. I'm going to move back a little bit. The other camera, you can't really see that. Okay, so now breathe in very hard, hold your breath, and now push together here. No, hold your breath, breathe in, hold your breath, push together. Okay, so he's not releasing, Okay, so he's not releasing his muscle. So his lat should release now when he breathes in because he needs space to breathe. So let's check the pecs front muscles, okay? We just check them like this. Hold together very strong right here. Hold together very strong. Hold together very strong. Hold. Okay. Don't breathe in. Just hold together very strong. Hold together. Hold, 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 hold. Breathe in. All the way. Breathe in, breathe in, breathe in. Hold your breath and... Okay, so this muscle is releasing. So the pecs are releasing. Latissimus dorsi is not releasing. So we were right here. So if you look at the attachment, so maybe that's what we're going to be solving. And I'm going to try that through integrating his mesencephalon or his process, spinal process, transverse process of C1 with this part of his spinal cord. So let's try that, okay? Very simple integration technique. The most simple integration technique we have is just activate this part of the spine at the same time or shortly after one after the other and integrate. So integration is always going up here on his head, and that is just something that has worked for 30 years or it's just an experience. We don't exactly know why this works. You can also integrate by just repeatedly activating this, but sometimes it takes a lot longer to do that. So that's why we like to use this and then this up here. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. I'm on both sides here on C1, transverse process. I go down his lower thoracic spine and I just go up on his head, activating his head. So I'm probably saying, it's probably like the enter key on the computer. Oops, forgot that. 1, 2, 3. I have to count in German, so I do this right. It's late in the evening. I've been working all day, so don't want to forget this. So you do that a couple of times. And what you cannot do is go like right here, then wait a couple of seconds, then go right here, and then what else did I have to do? Oh yeah, I had to do this. Okay, that's not going to work because the time is too long. The brain is not going to understand that this one part of the central nervous system has to do something with the other part of the central nervous system. So activate this, integrate that, do that a couple of times. I've done that too often now, just to show it again. Okay, so now we go back to the function we think might be associated with that. So breathing, we have mesencephalon, we have periaqueductal gray involved in diaphragm and other muscle function. It's called the emotional somatomotor system. So now we test again. He holds his arm on the sides, okay? And you just breathe normal. Don't breathe in. Just need to breathe normal. Hold very strong. Hold very strong. Okay, so that's good. Very strong lat dorsi. Now breathe in very far. Breathe in all the way. Breathe in all the way. Hold very strong. Okay, so now he's releasing his lat dorsi when he breathes in. That's what the body has to do. Because you can just try that. Just go like right here and activate that and push on your ribs and see how well you can breathe in. And if that doesn't release, it's really going to tighten down your ribs and hinder your breathing. I've had a ton of patients with this problem, with this functional problem. They have stress, they have neck pain, they have back pain, lower back pain, mid back pain, they have muscle problems, and it's just because muscle function and breathing is not coordinated. Okay, so what I just showed you, and of course you can also go treating this through functional treatments. I could just use the breathing and some other things, but I need to do that in a different way. So that's the other part or the other way of integrating, which I'm going to show at some point of time. Okay, so what I did now is I just looked for a pathway, for a tract, for a nervous part of the nervous system that's not integrating. So we said it's the spinal cord, the lower spinal cord, the lower thoracics, not talking to the upper part of the brainstem. I thought, well, what do we have here? It could be this. So we tested for that, and we saw that it did not work. So his lat dorsi was not responding to his breathing pattern. So we integrated that. Now his lat dorsi is responding to his breathing pattern again. So that's what neurofunctional integration is about. So that's what I wanted to show you today. And of course, what you can do now at home, no, not at home, or in your practice, first of all, we're going to have the manual and the teaching video clips available for free to look at of our course number 1 very soon, also in English. We have everything ready. The seminar, the manual is ready, the videos are ready. All we have to do is put it on our website so you can look at it, download the manual, look at it, all the context and everything. look at the videos. So you can, it's about 3 hours or 4 hours of videos saying all the steps. This is basically one part of that, one part of what we use to to enhance communication between brainstem and the spinal cord. So that's what spinal cord is about, that's what brainstem is about. So what you can do is you can go medulla, go down the spinal cord, test. If there's something there, go find where it is and integrate the two parts. You cannot just integrate one part. It's not going to work. You have to integrate two things. So back, spinal cord somewhere, and the other part of the brain. So we say medulla, we say mesencephalon, we say pons, and we say cerebellum. So you go this, down, test, nothing there. Next, down, test, nothing there. Next, pons, down. Okay, there's something there between pons and maybe upper thoracics. Just integrate it, okay? Then you can go to the spinal, to the cerebellum. If you correlate it with the spinal system, you just need to take the center part. So you just go down to the central part of the occiput, which correlates with cerebellar function. Go down, find where it is. If there's something there, it might be down here. It might also be up here. Integrate that. Okay, very simple, very, but still very effective. So it's not very specific, although we can't say that. I mean, if we talk about a descending activation system like the serotonin system, it might be very specific, and you can activate it very specific, and you just need this up here. You just need to go above the ears, left and right, and activate the skull. Yeah, so it's the parietal bone that we have here. Is it the bone? Is it cranial nerve 5? Is it the brain that's underneath that? We don't know. But activating this while activating the other two contacts activates the system really fast. So 3-4 times, repeat that. Touch, activate, touch, activate. Try it. Yeah. And let me know what happened, okay? So thanks for watching. It's 9:17. Yes, thank you. So we have recorded this. We're recording it on Zoom. You can watch it anytime. We'll have it ready on our channel, our YouTube channel, Neurolog Academy TV. In, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, we'll have that on there so you can watch it, or you can go back to Instagram and watch it, of course. Thank you very much for watching. I say thanks to my son for joining me today, so you can learn something. Who's here? Some people are watching. Thank you very much.